Okay, Chair, we are ready.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. on July 22nd, 2020. Will Madam Secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers, absent. Commissioner Engel.
Here.
Commissioner Lagomasino.
Here.
Commissioner Van Duker.
Here.
Vice Chair Sheeler.
Here.
Chair Schaefer.
Here. Thank you. For the purposes of the study session, we're going to not do this flag salute, so we'll move on to the next item. You select the next item, please.
The next item is going to be the study session for Safe Route to Schools Corridor Plan, and Leslie Bloomquist will take it from here.
If I might just do a brief introduction, Chair. We as a city have been working on improving walkability and bikeability throughout the city for quite a while now. And General Surfaces has generally led those efforts. And this is just another one of those efforts that really important corridor that has a number of challenges with walking and biking. And it's really important because there's 3 schools along it. So it's super important that we address this now. And this plan is going to really take some good steps to making that a nicer walk for all the students that go to those schools. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Leslie, who is our city engineer. Also noting that Stu Hodgkins is on his last couple months here, so he will be retiring in August, but Leslie will be taking over as our city engineer in his stead. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Thanks, Casey, and good evening, Chair Schaefer and Commissioners. Leslie Bloomquist, General Services Department. Also here tonight are 2 members of our consultant team. We have Libby Nachman, Senior Planner from Alta Planning and Design, and also Jocelyn Walker, Senior Engineering Associate with Alta Planning and Design. And we're here with information on the city's Carriage Drive and Laupe Lane Safe Schools Corridor Plan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with, Stacy, I need you to be able to allow me to share a screen for our presentation.
You should be good, Leslie.
Thank you. Oops. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. The presentation tonight will cover the project background and goals, schedule, what we've heard from the community, proposed improvements and alternatives, and next steps. There will be several stops in the presentation for Q&A and discussion. This project, although led by the city, is being developed in partnership with San Juan Unified School District. We've been working very closely with Mesa Verde High School, Sylvan Middle School, and Carriage Drive Elementary School. The plan that's being developed is looking at traffic safety and operational improvements both on the public streets and within the parking lots of each of the 3 schools. Although our team has developed concepts for modifications on school district property, our presentation tonight will focus on the recommendations for the city maintained and operated roadways. This project was initiated based on many years of feedback and concerns from residents, neighbors, and school representatives. The corridor is home to 3 schools with students ranging from kindergarten through high school. Between 2014 and 2017, the enrollment of students attending schools along the Carriage Drive and Laupe Lane corridor increased by nearly 25%. At the end of the 14-15 school year, Citrus Heights Elementary, which was located on the corner of Auburn and Carriage, closed, and the site was reopened a year later as the new home for Sylvan Middle School, increasing the student enrollment on this site from approximately 350 to 700 students. In addition, due to the closure of Citrus Heights Elementary, Carriage Drive Elementary enrollment increased from 450 to 630 students during that year. The increased enrollment brought with it many new and challenging transportation and safety concerns. The majority of students at these 3 schools arrive by car, and there has been an overall increase in the number of people traveling along the corridor. Although minor improvements have been completed over the years, many still indicate that they're not willing to walk or bike to school due to the congestion levels and safety concerns during the drop-off and pickup period. The majority of the concerns we hear include vehicle speeds, student crossing locations, and the challenges entering and exiting the various parking lots. This map shows the limits of the study, which is the purple line, and includes all of Carriage Drive and Laupe Lane from Auburn Boulevard up to Antelope Road, and it includes looking at both of those signalized intersections on either end. It also includes the area on Auburn Boulevard between Carriage Drive and Sylvan Corners in front of Sylvan Middle School. Needs along this corridor were identified in both the city's walkability master plan and the city's bike plan. In 2018, we applied for and were awarded a grant to develop this Safe Schools Corridor Plan. Phase 1 of the project is complete and consisted of a review of the existing conditions. During phase 1, we performed a significant amount of public outreach to the community to fully understand the current concerns along the corridor and at each school. This information was used as we moved into phase 2 and developed several alternatives for the corridor. In late May, we held a virtual community workshop where the concepts were presented to the public. Currently, we're in phase 2, and we're here tonight to present the concepts to you and gather your feedback on the various alternatives. This grant is for the plan development only, and there's currently no construction funds. So once the plan is complete, in order to construct, we would need to pursue future grants for implementation. And I'd like to turn it over now to Libby to discuss more of the details.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the outreach and what we heard, and then I'm going to move into the proposed goals, improvements, and alternatives. So as Leslie mentioned, in 2019, we had our first round of outreach to hear from the community what their concerns were. If you could back up one slide, please. We reached about 224 people in our first round of outreach through a number of different events, including a community-wide open house, pop-up events at the different schools, as well as school-based meetings. We met with community groups, including neighborhood meetings and the English Language Acquisition Program parent meeting, and had an online survey. So we had some key issues that we identified in the first round of outreach that we used to inform the alternatives that we are proposing. The top issue that we heard across all of our outreach were concerns around safety for people bicycling and walking. This was common whether we were talking in person, whether it came in online. There was concern around people walking on Auburn specifically, as well as people bicycling on Carriage Drive. There is an existing bike lane, but people noted that vehicles are parking in the bike lane. The second major issue that we identified were concerns around vehicle traffic patterns, specifically circulation along the corridor and in parking lots. There were comments regarding congestion and conflict due to spillover from the multiple parking lots where parents were dropping off and picking up their kids, which results in decreased visibility for users and challenges for people walking and biking to access the schools. The third issue we identified was the behavior of people walking. There were requests for education and enforcement, noting that students were walking and in the street at times, sometimes crossing where there were no crosswalks, partially due to lack of adequate sidewalks and crosswalks, and potentially due as well to education and enforcement limits. The fourth key issue was a perception of unsafe speeds along the corridor. Some of the community members noted that this was perhaps being used as a cut through for people to avoid traffic. So people not familiar with the neighborhood, not familiar with the corridor as a school corridor would be speeding and driving quite quickly in order to cut through this neighborhood. And finally, we heard feedback in nearly all of our events about one specific location. This is, we call it the Laupe Lane / / Loppy Lane crosswalk. We'll point it out on a map later, but it's where the northern entrance to Mesa Verde High School is, where Loppy Lane curves. There's a crosswalk and a lot of concerns around kids crossing that crosswalk, and we're hard to see specifically with overgrown bushes and the location specifically of the crosswalk. So we took all of that feedback and proposed improvements and alternatives, and we took them to the community, as Leslie mentioned, in our second round of outreach, intended to be in person, but we pivoted pretty quickly to make it virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were pleased to see that we reached 131 people. That's over half of the number we reached in the first round, purely through digital methods. We had a live Zoom webinar, which was recorded and posted on the website for people to view at a later time. The webinar had interactive polling. We had an online community open house, so people could, at their own time, walk through the proposals and provide comments. And then tonight, this Planning Commission, and tomorrow we'll be speaking as well as City Council. So we have a few goals for tonight. I'm going to present first on improvements that we are recommending for installation based on the community feedback we've heard so far. We will be stopping for your feedback, so we welcome your feedback, but these will be things that we are recommending. We'll next move into improvements where we did not have consensus from the community feedback, and we want to hear what you think regarding specific roadway improvements and alternatives for the two sections of the corridor. And between each section, we'll stop for about 5 minutes of discussion. We'll need to hold it to about 5 minutes in order to stay on pace, but we will be asking for your feedback on each of those items. So I'm going to walk through first the improvements that we're recommending. The first column is the name of the improvement, and the second column is the percent of support we heard on the online community survey. So the percent of people who took the survey who said, yes, I support this improvement. So I'm actually going to walk through them in a little bit of a backwards way because we have images over 2 slides. So I'm going to talk first about the rectangular rapid flash beacon here, which we have an image right here. If you're not familiar with this improvement, it's a sign that's placed at crosswalks that when actuated, so when the button is pushed, it flashes in a regular pattern, which is known to generate a greater response from people driving to yield to students walking. So we're proposing one rectangular rapid flash beacon at Carriage Drive and Midnight Way, where there is a raised crosswalk known colloquially as the Kitty Walk from everyone in the school community. And there's been concerns at this location regarding students crossing, and so this and drivers not yielding. So we're proposing this rectangular rapid flash beacon at that location. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to walk through the different improvements. So we're proposing high visibility crosswalks, this first image, a number of crossings along the corridor to address the concern around people crossing on the roadway. It's shown that marking crosswalks helps to increase compliance while crossing. It also increases the awareness of the crossing location for not only people walking, but also people driving. So in this image, it's you can see the yellow thick bars. That's the actual crosswalk the crosswalk improvement right there. So that's the crosswalk improvement that had widespread support. We're proposing widening the sidewalk on Auburn Boulevard. That's in this bottom left image. You can see a wider sidewalk. This provides a dedicated off-street space for people walking and as well as children bicycling. We're proposing this to be widened so that it can handle the surge of students, particularly middle school students walk in large groups, and the current sidewalk is inadequate to fit the students as they walk in these large groups. We're proposing speed humps, the top middle image, at a number of locations along the corridor with the aim to slow speeds. As we heard that concern from the community around unsafe speeds, the presence of speed humps will encourage people to drive slower. The bottom center photo of curb extensions, we're proposing at a number of intersections as well. Curb extensions do a number of things. They help to shorten the distance to cross streets. So especially younger folks, children with smaller legs take longer to cross, so it shortens that distance for them. There's more space at the corner for people to congregate, especially large groups of students that might be waiting to cross together. And they also serve to slow vehicle turning movements. So it slows vehicles and reduces potential conflicts between people crossing and people driving. The top right photo we have for vertical curbs, we're proposing vertical curbs along the entirety of the corridor. Right now, the curbs are rolled curbs. The vertical curbs are helpful because they limit vehicle encroachment on the sidewalk, so keeping the sidewalks clear for people to walk. And it also serves as a barrier, so keeps people safe. If a vehicle were to swerve, it can't easily pull up onto the sidewalk. It will be stopped by the curb. And finally, we're proposing green conflict markings approaching intersections. So these are used to denote where bike lanes approach an intersection to raise awareness for all road users of potential conflict areas. It increases visibility of people bicycling for people driving, as well as guiding people on bicycles of where to go and makes their movements more predictable. And these are being proposed again at a number of intersections. So all of these things are items that we are recommending for implementation based on feedback from the community and based on our existing conditions research into the corridor. But we'd like to stop a moment for 5 minutes of discussion to hear any feedback that you all might have.
Any comments or questions from the commissioners?
Yes, I do. This is Michael. I do too, Tom. Leslie, I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names right now. The wide sidewalk that you're proposing on Auburn Boulevard, is that going to be extended? If it was to go through, would it be extended into the roadway, or would it go onto private property?
It would go onto private property.
Okay, there's only the one house that I know of that it would extend into then, at least on Auburn Boulevard. Would it be on both sides of the street or just one?
Just on the school side of the street.
Okay. The other one I have is the curb extensions. I'm not sure where you're planning on putting those, but I noticed the example you gave the extensions seem to extend into a bike lane, or there wouldn't be a bike lane at the curb. Wouldn't that cause a conflict between bicyclists and cars coming up? Or is there enough room to put the curb extensions in those locations without extending into the bike lane?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the curb extensions would be further designed in the design phase, but they will extend into the parking lane, but they would not extend into the bike lane.
Okay, one more item, just for sake of discussion. I don't know if California has this law, but I know Arizona does. At least they did when I was there in '76, Tucson. During while school's in session, they put out temporary speed limits, 15 miles an hour, and it's extended on both sides of the school for quite a ways. And believe me, they do enforce that. When I was there, I didn't get caught, but a couple of the airmen that I was with did, and they said it's kind of expensive. But I don't know if that's something that the state is thinking about, or if it is within the state. So that's also an idea that sometimes, particularly for the speeders. Thank you.
Commissioner Sheeler? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say the state of California does allow us to reduce that to a 25 mile down to 15 during school. So that's a great suggestion. We'll consider that and look into that.
Yeah, most of the time the speed limits are temporary while school was in session, normally about 30 minutes to and 30 minutes after. And I believe the signs were temporary and were put out by the janitor or school staff and then taken in at the prescribed time, so that once the school was done, the limits were removed.
Thanks.
This is Tom. I take it, where would the speed bump be relative to the crosswalk?
So the location of the speed bumps would be decided in the design phase, but they would be mid-block in between. It wouldn't be right near the crosswalk, it'd be in between crosswalks in the middle of blocks.
And the green conflict markers, is there any indication of a stencil that shows bicycle or something? Or, I mean, I don't know that people would necessarily understand that to mean a bicycle lane.
Yeah, the green would go kind of towards the end. We would still have all the standard bicycle lane markings there. This would just be kind of like additional information where cars and bikes have to cross each other. So where cars are making a right turn and they have to cross into that bike lane, the green would go there. All other markings would be the same as other bike lane locations that we're more familiar with.
Understood, thank you. And I was also thinking of the same thing as Commissioner Lagomasino was thinking of, trying to slow the traffic during the critical times. If that's not possible, I would certainly encourage to have additional police units, when this is implemented, additional police units very visible to make sure people adhere to the crosswalks and protect children and whatever else. I guess my other thought was, would it be possible, everything's possible, I guess, with enough money, to have a sign that, obviously bigger gets more expensive, but something that notifies people that students are unloading or students in the area, or something that, I realize you got the crossing walk, but something to let them know as they approach that there are a lot of students are in the area and they should be careful.
Yeah, that's another great suggestion. And we'll look into signage, warning signage for schools. We do have the existing school crossing and upcoming schools, but perhaps there's more that we can implement.
Thank you.
So I do have a question with regard to the first example, the high visibility crosswalk. Is that the same as you referred to an RRFB on the previous slide? Is that what the reference to that, where that center sign in the center of the street is illuminated?
No, so they're separate features. If you could back up, Leslie, to the image of the RRFB. The RRFB is this sign it's on the side of the road, not in the center of the road. And the flashing part is the illuminated section in between the arrow and the image of the person.
So
and it's typically on both sides of the street, but it depends based on the final design.
They are often installed together. So where you have a high visibility crosswalk, you'd also have the push button that you push with the flashing lights at that same location.
Got it. So I'm thinking about in the fall when we do the time change, where it's still, it's just getting to be well, and they did change now that I think about it, they changed the school hours to start at 8:30 now. So that's less of an issue, but certainly in lower visibility times, is there any option for putting, I've seen the lights that actually go into the crosswalk that are built into the roadway. Is that something that would be considered?
So we did consider those, but those tend to cause more issues than a rectangular rapid flash beacon, since they're only visible to the first person driving. It can potentially cause someone to stop suddenly, and then we've seen issues in other communities where there's rear endings and other types of collisions separate from the people crossing. So we typically recommend the RRFB instead. And we did also think about the concern around the lights flashing in the evening. But when we looked at we don't anticipate this crossing really being used beyond school hours. And so it was very unlikely it would be flashing in the dark in the evenings and bothering the neighbors in the area.
Thank you very much.
I have a question on those RF, those beacons. I'm not real familiar with that. Is it something that just is like a railroad crossing type thing? You see it upon approaching the crosswalk?
So it's a sign that's mounted on the side of the road like you see in this image, and typically there's no lights flashing. There's a push button on the pole. When someone wants to cross, they push the button and the lights on the pole will start flashing, and it's sort of an irregular pattern, which helps to get the attention of people driving. And so they flash for however long it's set to flash. The city would ultimately program it to flash for a certain amount of time, and then it would turn off and it would stay dark until another person pushed the button.
I don't think I've ever seen one of those. That sounds like a great idea.
All right, so with no other questions, we'll keep moving to some of the items where we really are hoping to get some feedback, since the community did not coalesce around a solution. So we're going to be talking about 2 roadway improvements, circular intersections and a raised roadway. And then we're going to talk about Loppy Lane between Antelope and Pratt. We have 2 different alternatives we've proposed. And then Carriage Drive between Canai Avenue and Auburn Boulevard, we again have 2 different alternatives that we've proposed. So the first are circular intersections. You can see in the top left of this slide the results from the survey. 48% supported it, 45% did not, and 7% needed more info. You can see an image here of a potential circular intersection. We're proposing it at 2 locations in particular, Carriage and Canai, and Carriage and Pratt. And we've listed some of the benefits and trade-offs in the top right. In terms of benefits, they do a great job of regulating traffic through intersections while also reducing speed. So that was meeting a couple goals of the study, which was to increase access for people while also increasing safety. Another great benefit is that they allow for safe and predictable U-turns. Something I did not mention that we heard in the first round of outreach were concerns around people making unsanctioned U-turns, particularly along Loppy Lane, parents who have dropped off their kids and then are trying to get back the other direction. And so we proposed these 2 circular intersections, which would allow people to make those U-turns in a safe and predictable manner. And then the final benefit depends on the design, but potentially could include vegetation or public art and add to some placemaking. And in terms of trade-offs, we noted that that can be unfamiliar to some drivers. The other roadway improvement is a raised roadway. It's you can see again the support. 44% supported it, 41% did not, 15% wanted more info. We're proposing a raised roadway, which is essentially, you can think of it as a very large extended speed hump. Drivers would drive up onto the raised roadway. They'd slow in order to drive up onto it, and then they would again need to slow down as they drove off of it. We're proposing it at this corner I mentioned earlier, the northern portion of Mesa Verde High School, where Loppy Lane curves. And we were trying to think of a solution for this corner where we did hear, as I mentioned, it was one of the top concerns in our first round of outreach. A raised roadway benefits are that it reduces speed through the roadway, encouraging people driving to yield to people crossing. In terms of trade-offs, it's more expensive to install than something like a crosswalk. And so a lot of the concern we heard from the community regarding the raised roadway were related to the cost. So we'd like to take just another 5 minutes here to get your feedback on these 2 proposals. And yeah, would love to hear what you think and answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
I do.
I'll go ahead. this, the circle, yeah, everybody is not necessarily familiar with them, but they're becoming more, more around every place, and people will get used to them. There have been some problems, certainly people blowing straight over the top of them, and whatever, but I don't think that's a big problem. How much of an elevation differential is there on the road elevation? How much elevation are we talking about?
Are you referring to the height of the curb of the circle in the middle?
No, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm moving on to the raised roadway. How much of an elevation differential is there on the raised roadway?
Libby, did you want to discuss?
Yeah, I'm going to see if Jocelyn actually can talk about that one.
Oh, it usually goes up to the level of your sidewalk, and will depend obviously on the grade of the street when you design that raised intersection. But I would say as a rule, you would go up to the 6-inch elevation of the curb so that it's basically people can walk straight across. There's no drop from the sidewalk.
And in the picture, it's a little difficult to tell. Are you talking about, is it a different road surface?
It can be to, give it more definition, or you could mark it with paint. But a lot of these are done in, something with a little more texture and color to make them more visible. And in a lot of spots, these are real kind of placemaking items, but you could have a variety of materials.
And would you have some signs saying slow curve or something, or to announce this?
Right, yes. And pavement markings indicating where similar to what would be on a speed hump, showing that there is a change in elevation there. Signage, yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to discuss the circle, the traffic circles. What I don't want to happen is the fiasco the city went through along with the residents on Woodmore Oaks and Crux Drive. How many times was that intersection modified? I believe 3 times. And we're right back where we started from now. Correct me if I'm wrong though, but Canai and Carriage is the one that's in front of Mesa. And the Pratt and Carriage is the one that's in front of Carriage. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
I just don't want to see the city trying to put these in and eventually having to take them all back out again. So I would like to see more participation or more a better vote of confidence from the residents that would have to put up with it day after day. And also, hey, I'm for it. I think it's going to slow traffic down. I think it's going to slow it down enough that people will start thinking. But I just, like I said, I don't want the city to spend the money to put one in, then have to pull it back out again, particularly in these times. So I want to make sure that everybody's on board, or majority of the people would be on board with this. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks.
I've got 2 questions. With the circle, is that similar to what's down by City Hall? Is that considered a circle?
Yes, it would be similar but smaller. The one that's shown here is at Spicer and Sperry, south of Greenback near San Juan. And it would be a similar size to that one, more of a neighborhood circle than the one at City Hall is a little bit bigger than what we're proposing to put here.
Okay, and my second question in regard to the circle is, is there data about having them near a school? Like I could see it being a draw for a kid, to run out there in the middle of the circle. So I'm kind of curious if there's been much, if anyone's looked into that by schools in particular with those age different, you know, you've got kindergartners all the way up to high schoolers. So somehow if it was not made to be an attractive thing to try to go gather in the middle of.
Great, thank you. That's a great suggestion. I do know there have been roundabouts installed near schools, but we can reach out to them and ask their experience with those concerns.
Yeah, I could see definitely an opportunity for skateboarding, throw your bike up there, you know, just things if I were a kid still.
There is circles by Lichen School and Lichen. I believe it's the intersection just before Lichen. And there's also another one on Zenith and I want to say Cambridge, but that may not be the cross street.
Yeah, there's 2 on Zenith.
Okay, I'd be curious to go look at those. I love the idea as far as getting traffic slow down there. I think it's an awesome idea. And I think I like the loopy or loupy, I guess you're saying now, lane curve too. I think that's a great answer to slowing that down.
So in the
Also-
interest, sorry,
Go ahead, Casey.
this is Tim.
Tim, okay.
Yeah, so the interest of time, Commissioner Flowers has been very patient in waiting to be called on, so I'd like to move on to Commissioner Flowers if you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Leslie, I have a question for you, 2 questions. We have one of these roundabouts, if you will, at the end of our street, so I have some personal experience with it. I wondered if there's been any studies on the potential traffic accidents on these roundabouts. Has the city conducted anything like that to determine if there is a higher rate of accidents for them? And then the second question is, who maintains the vegetation within them? And I'm speaking about, that's assuming there's vegetation in it.
Right, I'm having a little difficulty hearing, but I think you're asking about the accidents and then maintaining the landscaping in the middle. So the landscaping, I'll start with that one, would be maintained by the city since it would be in the public roadway. And that's similar to the roundabouts that we have elsewhere in the city, such as Fountain Square and here at Spicer and Sperry. And then regarding the collisions, roundabouts in general, I haven't done an analysis before and after for the 2 that we have here in Citrus Heights. But in general, roundabouts have been shown to reduce collisions, just simply because everyone's kind of traveling in the same direction. They're going around the circle instead of crossing in the middle. And so that directional change and the reduction of the number of conflicts is really what causes the number of collisions to be reduced at these intersections versus standard typical that we're kind of used to intersections without the circle in the middle.
I have one question about the roundabouts also. The ones on Zenith, I think, have stop signs as well. Would these have stop signs or just the roundabout?
The ones up near Woodside are not true roundabouts. They're a little different, not quite standard for what we are presenting and recommending here. These ones would not have stop signs. They would have yields. So everyone entering would yield to anyone already in the roundabout or circle.
I could see that as a problem, only because I did daycare for a couple of years and dropping kids off at school. Carriage is one of them, and parents are not patient. And so I don't know how roundabouts work. I'm not that familiar, but I'm pretty familiar with current drivers. I love the idea of the roundabout for the U-turn, which would kind of alleviate that problem, but who's to say it's not just going to be a mad rush to be first in the circle, you know? I've not seen them, so I don't know. It's not an issue. Andrew?
I don't think so. The one at Woodmore Oaks and Crux was very poorly designed, was part of the problem with it. And people do tend to slow down for the roundabouts, but it also improves traffic flow because they're not actually stopping like with a stop sign. At least that's what I believe I've heard.
Okay, thank you.
So I have one more comment.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
One more quick one. If roundabouts do become the end of the, the end result here, I'd like to see some kind of public art that is around the motif of, in that particular area, going to schools and, whatever neighborhood it happens to be, it really would be helpful if there was some kind of identity and the purpose for putting the roundabout in there. If we're going to we're going to put them in, we should have some art there with some kind of school bus or some kind of reminder that everybody drives by every time they drive by that this is a school route. And it's just raising the public awareness to that effect.
That's a great idea. Thank you. I was going to say, in the interest of time, we may want to move on to the next section. So this is the proposal for Loppy Lane between Antelope and Pratt. And just to orient you, I have an image looking north on Loppy. Currently, there are 2 driving lanes, 2 parking lanes, and 2 sidewalks without and no bicycle facilities. So I'm going to walk through 2 different alternatives. These are cross-section views, so you can imagine that we're looking in the same direction, looking north. We have to the left is the west side, and to the right is the east side, and behind us would be south. So the first alternative that we propose to the community is to add bicycle lanes to the roadway, striped bicycle lanes. This would result in narrowing the sidewalk in some areas while widening it in others, since the right-of-way is not entirely consistent in this section. In order to accommodate the bike lanes, parking would be removed on the west side, north of Oak Grove Estates, but the parking would not be removed south of Oak Grove Estates. The second alternative is to maintain both driving lanes and both parking lanes and add a shared use path or a trail on the west side of the street. It would be a different consistency than a sidewalk. It would be signed and indicated that people walking or biking could use this shared use path. And so when looking at the 2 together, we actually had pretty overwhelming support on the survey. About 62% of people supported alternative 2, which was the shared use path. And the benefits I'll walk through the benefits and trade-offs of both. So for alternative 1, the benefits are that there is the roadway space for people bicycling and some of the wider sidewalks so people could walk and children could bicycle. That main trade-off would be the removal of parking, and that on-street bicycle lanes are not always the most appropriate infrastructure for students, especially younger students. The shared use path, which again had the community support, provides a low stress off-street facility for people to walk and bike, an all ages and abilities facility. It minimizes conflict by physically separating people bicycling and walking from vehicles. The major trade-off for this option is that it's more expensive, and finding grant funding would take a little bit more time to get to implementation. So we are a little bit short on time, but I want to stop for a second to discuss. So if there's any thoughts on these 2 options, preferences.
Correct me if I'm wrong, this is Michael. There are private residences on the west side. On the east side is the trailer park, which is quite a bit of open space between the trailers and the roadway. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm wondering why you would want to widen the sidewalk on the west side, where you would probably have to take away some of the frontage of those homes, because some of those homes are pretty close to the street now versus, never mind, I can understand why you're moving it, because if you put the wider streets on the east side, no, on the west side. No, if you were to put them on the east side, you'd have to cross the street at Loppy to get to the school. Okay,
Correct. And also we'd be pushing the curb and gutter into the existing roadway. So we wouldn't be taking any of the frontage of the private properties. It would be reducing the width of the road and kind of pushing in that way.
okay, I understand now. I was just on the street today with CHPD. Thank you.
I'm sorry to have another question, but can you explain why alternative 2 minimizes conflicts if there's not like space for walking and a space for bicycling, especially if you have little ones and teenagers walking and biking? Is it just because it's so wide?
Yeah, so the major concerns for vulnerable road users like people walking and biking is the conflict with vehicles. So you're right that there is potential for conflict between people bicycling and walking, but generally, yes, the trail will be wide to accommodate multiple uses. And generally, there's less concern around that type of conflict because the opportunities for a severe collision are reduced. And there are also design options. You know, as you move into design, there's ways you can stripe the path to indicate where people bike, where people walk. That's a design decision that could be made later.
Yeah, I think that would be something that alternative 2 looks good, except for that issue is a bunch of teenagers biking and somebody having to jump out of the way.
Thanks.
And I know we're getting tight on time, so unless there are other questions, I might want to move along to the next option. So this is potentially the most contentious option. So we really would love to hear some feedback from all of you on this. We have a proposal for Carriage Drive between Canai and Auburn. Just to give you an orientation to the current layout, there's 2 driving lanes, 2 parking lanes, 2 sidewalks, and 2 bicycle lanes. The bike lanes and sidewalks are both considered substandard in that they're narrower than what would be recommended to accommodate people walking and bicycling. So our first option is alternative 1, which would widen the sidewalks, widen the bicycle lanes, widen the bicycle lanes from 4 feet to 5 feet to meet recommended standards. This would result in narrowing both the driving and parking lanes. The sidewalks would stay as is. Alternative 2 would also widen the bike lanes, but would provide a significantly wider sidewalk on the east side of the street. This would result in narrowing the drive lanes and removing parking on the east side of Carriage Drive. So this one, we didn't have a clear support from the community. About 31% supported alternative 1, just over half, 51% supported alternative 2, and close to 20% wanted more information. So for both alternatives, the narrow drive lanes help slow speeds and the wider bicycle lanes meet standards. In the first alternative, you do have the benefit of retaining parking, but in the second alternative, you have the benefit of the wider sidewalk accommodating larger groups of students, as well as kids who might be bicycling. And this will help to minimize vehicle conflicts with people walking and biking. In terms of trade-offs, in the first alternative, you have those narrow sidewalks. And as I said earlier, in the other option, the bicycle lane and the roadway might not be used as much by students and families. In the second alternative, the trade-off is the removal of parking on one side of the street. So we would love to hear from all of you between those 2 alternatives, what you think makes the most sense for this corridor based on what we've presented.
Could you put the, thank you.
This is Tom. I guess I'm surprised that alternative 2 was the preferred option, given that the bicycle lane is still adjacent to the roadway and they're losing parking on one side. I guess I'm surprised at that. I would have thought 1 would have been the alternative, preferred alternative.
I agree with Tom and is surprised that the number 2 is the preferred alternative. I do have a question. Some of the worst parking on that stretch is when is not during school, but when there's soccer practice. Has any accommodation been made for that? Because it seems like during soccer practice, both sides of the street fill up really full with parking, and it goes into the side streets and stuff. What would removing a whole section of parking do to that?
Yeah, so we did hear that concern. That was some of the feedback that we heard from the community from this. So that's a great point. We didn't do a full parking evaluation, but I would imagine people would be parking more into some of the other side streets in order to find somewhere to park.
And I'm going to second Commissioner Sheeler's comments. I'm really surprised that alternative 2 was more popular with those people that participated, because I do think the parking issue is would turn into a pretty major issue. We might have to come back and revisit because of the parking. And so, I would definitely lean towards alternative 1.
I would like to go with alternative 1 also. My question is though, how many of the people that lived on Canai actually took part in the survey?
That's a great question. I don't have offhand the demographics of the people who took the survey. We didn't collect street address information from the people who took the survey. People were able to offer that if they wanted, but I do know that a large proportion of the survey takers did identify themselves as neighborhood residents, but didn't specify what street they lived on.
If I remember right, Canai is a wide street anyway. So it probably, I don't know, I'm kind of leaning towards alternate 1 versus the sidewalk. I'm not sure how many people would walk down Canai going towards Auburn Boulevard. But then again, I'm not familiar with the demographics of the students right now at Mesa Verde or Carriage. So
Is it possible to, just because I don't think the picture illustrates it very well, what is the width of the walking sidewalk in alternative 1 versus 2?
You're asking about the width of the sidewalk in alternative 1?
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, the width of the sidewalks in alternative 1 versus 2.
Yeah, Jocelyn, could you speak a little bit to the details of the sidewalk width?
Sure. So the actual width of the sidewalk may, vary just based on existing conditions. But right now what you have is, a 4 to 5 foot sidewalk. And so just giving, the idea is to, if you're taking, narrowing some of the other elements, giving that sidewalk a little more room. Again, it would go from 4 or 5 to 5 or 6 feet. And then for alternative 2, for alternative 1, you would leave the existing sidewalk, but for alternative 2, it would increase it enough to keep a little more room for pedestrians, but it will vary.
And would there be a curb between the pedestrian sidewalk and the street?
Yes, it would be a typical curb and gutter.
Okay, but with any vegetation or planting on it? Or does the sidewalk go up to the street?
That is something that we can definitely look into. There's a little bit of room in alternative 2 if we wanted to put a landscape buffer between the bike lane and the sidewalk. But in alternative one, we're using all of the right of way really for all the modes of travel plus the parking. So I'm not sure that it would be possible in alternative one.
Okay, and as far as the bike lanes, they would not change in width, right?
They are shown to be increasing to 5 feet in width.
In alternative two?
Yeah, in both of them.
Oh, okay. All right. So currently alternative one it's picturing what it is right now.
Essentially, yes. We would be widening the sidewalk, widening the bike lane slightly and then formalizing that parking lane and reducing the travel lanes to get that extra width in the bike lane.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd also be inclined to lean towards alternative one. I'm surprised too that the survey showed that more preferred the other one, especially when they're losing an entire parking lane, and I don't see that they're gaining a tremendous amount. So thank you.
Thank
So
you.
it looks like we're just about out of time before the regular meeting starts. Did you have any last minute things, Leslie, that you needed to address?
No, that was it. We just wanted to say thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, and real quick, I'm going to ask that everybody stay on this stream. We're just going to continue on this stream and not use the other meeting. So if Leslie and those that want to exit, they can do that. And then when chair is ready, we can pick up the Planning Commission meeting at 7 o'clock.
Absolutely. Okay. So we don't have to close the study session or anything, right?
Yeah, we do. So if
Oh,
you can go, yes, if you can go ahead and.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the study session. Thank you very much for everyone who joined us and who put the work in to present to us. Appreciate that. Okay.
We'll have a little bit of a pause. Everything is rolling. We will go live in just a moment with Planning Commission. We're still live, right? Yes. So Chair, when it's 7 o'clock, if you want to call the meeting, we're good to go.
Okay. I have 6:59. Are we live?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call the regular meeting to order. Noting the time is 7 p.m. on 7/22/2020. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Duncan, absent. Commissioner Flowers.
Present.
Commissioner Engel.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Lagomasino.
Present.
Commissioner Van Duker.
Present.
Vice Chair Sheeler.
Present.
Chair Schaefer.
Present. Okay, so moving on to the flag salute, can I ask Commissioner Engel to lead us in a flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the
To the
flag
flag of the United States
of
of
America,
America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done. Okay, so next we're moving on to the next agenda item, please.
The next agenda item. Give me just one moment. Yes, I'm going to share the screen with Allie. Give me just one moment. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, public comment. Sorry about that, folks. Under Government Code Section 54954.3, members of the audience may address the commission on any agenda item within the jurisdiction of the commission or any agenda item. Those wishing to speak on non-agenda items will be called upon at the beginning of the meeting. Those wishing to speak against or for an agenda item will be called upon after the presentation by the City Planning Department for that item.
We have no comments emailed in.
Thank you, Casey.
May I have the next item, please?
Consent calendar, approval of minutes for April 22nd, 2020.
Planning Commission, is there any changes or corrections to the minutes?
I move approval.
I have a second.
I'll second.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Can we repeat who did the second? Thank you.
You please call a roll, or can we just all vote in favor of accepting the minutes, or do we need to call individually?
Unfortunately, Chair, when you do it by Zoom, you have to do it roll call every vote.
Okay. So would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers,
Yes.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler, I'm sorry, yeah, Commissioner Schaefer.
Yes.
Sorry about that, Chair Schaefer. Okay. Next item.
Yes. Next item, please.
Public hearing. Item 6A, a general plan amendment and zoning code revisions. The Planning Commission will review an amendment to the general plan to modify the allowed density within the general commercial plan use designation to 0.0 through 40 units per acre to be considered with the zoning code. The Planning Commission will also consider a variety of updates to the city zoning code and forward the recommendation to City Council. The proposed zoning code amendments include revisions to sections pertaining to creekside setbacks, fencing, parking, home occupations, as well as a variety of other amendments. A complete list of changes can be obtained from the Planning Division. Environmental determination. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA under section 515305 of the guidelines. Project planner, Allison Bermudez.
Hello, Commission. Allison Bermudez here with the Planning Division. As Stacy just mentioned and read the description of the item, we have two actions before you tonight as one item. We're going to be amending the general plan and amending some zoning code amendments, both of these being legislative actions. So you'll review and your recommendation will be forwarded to the City Council for final action. Just a reminder how the general plan and the zoning code work together as far as land uses in the city. So the general plan establishes a broad land use application to the city. So areas are designated for commercial, for residential, at a variety of kind of broad levels. And the zoning code takes those levels of land use and identifies them more specifically, more on a parcel by parcel basis. And so since these two documents work together, the general plan being the broad and the zoning code being the more specific, consistency is important, that they are reflecting the same land uses. So I just wanted to show you this is the land use map for the city. So this shows the general planned land uses. As you can see, there's a list of land uses that are broad. There's low density, medium density, residential uses, and then a commercial zone designated on here as general commercial. So if we look at one area in particular, you see a variety of colors, the red being the general commercial and the shades of yellow being different residential zones. So it's these broad categories that we're referring to when we're talking about the general plan. And so if you go to the general plan in table 4 that talks about is the land use designations, you see the general plan designations on the chart there on the left that's talking about very low, low, and then goes on down. And then the next column identifies which zones within the zoning code are reflective of that general plan designation. So what we're focusing on tonight is this one category for general commercial, which will cover the commercial zones identified here in the zoning code as AC, GC, LC. So it's a pretty wide variety. And it has a broad density range shown on here of 0 to 20, meaning residential units developed in a commercial zone would have a density level of 0 to 20 units per acre, depending on the specific zone. So this is the table that's in the general plan. Now, if you go to the table that's in the zoning code, it's table 2.6, and this is the commercial district standards. It also includes the BP, LC, SC, and GC zones. And if you look at this chart and you go down to its density, you can see the conflict here. It's stating that the BP zone is 20 units per acre, the LC is 20 units per acre. But then when you get to the SC zone and the GC zone, it does allow a density level up to 40 units per acre. And as if you recall from this chart, it showed a maximum density of 20. So it's that inconsistency that I'm proposing to correct tonight, so that they do remain consistent at that level. So the reason to amend it is, as I mentioned, it does need to be consistent. The two documents work hand in hand, so they should be the same. And the increased density in the general plan, it does offer a variety of housing options in the commercial zone with the increased density. Allows us to provide more opportunities to meet our regional housing needs. And then just to say, this is only amending the general plan, which is correcting that table. It's specifically not, it's not changing the zoning code where it shows the 40 units per acre. It's been that way for many years. It's just, this is just correcting the inconsistency. So this is not changing anything in the zoning code to the current density that exists now. So any questions on that before I move on to the zoning amendments? Nope, good. You guys understood that? Wow, good. It gets confusing. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna go to the zoning code changes. I was before you a couple months ago with the first set of revisions, and this is kind of a follow-up to that with some additional amendments. And there's about 3 or 4, I believe, contained, but I just want to talk about a few of them. Most of them are pretty minor, but a couple to talk about. One is amending, proposing to amend our commercial land use table. We have a land use table in the zoning code that says in this particular commercial zone, you can do this and you can't do that. And it's that chart that you've seen often. One of the categories is the BP zone, which is our business professional zone, which you generally are going to find your office and your low traffic generator uses. In that zone, certain uses are allowed, but in a very minor amount, meaning if you have an office building, you could have cafe services and you could have food services, but only a certain percentage because they're needed to support the offices. But you couldn't have a full like restaurant or very high traffic generator. So currently the BP zone allows that mix of the two uses, but it does limit the floor space to 15%. So if you had an office building and you wanted to put a coffee shop in there, as long as you weren't occupying more than 15% of the total building space for this complementary use, you could do it. But if your use exceeded that 15%, you could do it, but you would have to file for a use permit. And you have reviewed many applications for a use permit. They come before the Planning Commission for pretty extensive review. And we're proposing to change that down to a minor use permit. And that review is done at staff level. We look at many of the same things you would look at. It's just a lower level of review, and it does decrease the cost of the applicant, and it makes it for quicker timing. And generally, you're going to find this in, let's say the shop, it's a very large office building, and they're going to have 2 coffee shops maybe, or they're going to have a little retail in there that's going to sell office supplies. So you may get beyond that 15%. So we wanted to allow that, but we wanted to let them do it with a lower level use permit for ease of processing for them and to save money for the applicant. So that's one minor change. The other change is we have a section of the zoning code on creekside development. As you know, we have miles and miles of creeks and flood zone in the city. And so portion of the zoning code is dedicated to developing properties that are adjacent to those sensitive creeks. And we did have one section in the zoning code that talked about setbacks, and it gave two measurements for setbacks. It was an either or situation. And the two weren't compatible. And as you saw them in the staff report, it was like, you either have this setback or you have this setback. And we're just going to eliminate the choice, because the application of the setback being 2.5 times the creek bank plus 30 feet was the more appropriate one in development to apply to the development. So we are proposing to eliminate the second choice. And then a couple modifications on our home occupations. And these are business activities that you can run from your home for your home-based business. Very popular these days as more people are working at home and shifting their businesses to their residence to work. So we wanted to clarify some of those guidelines in that, and one being that you cannot do tattoo or body art from the home. That this is not something new that we're prohibiting. You could not do this. As a matter of fact, you couldn't even get a permit from county health, which is required to do it from your home. But we did want to call that out specifically for that in the home occupation regulations, just to make it clear. And then the other change was on transportation. Our code that we've had under home occupations had a write-out provision to prohibit transportation-related activities from the home. And that has been in the zoning code since incorporation. It was a carryover from the from the county. And we found over time, transportation services have really changed. People are doing them from your home in many ways. Let's say dispatching now is a lot of times done at home just by computer, by phone. You could dispatch for trucking companies or other logistic movements, and you do that from home, not necessarily from an office, but there really is no activity at the home. So that was prohibited before because it was considered a transportation service. So we're proposing to remove that prohibition from transportation services from the home and move the regulation of them to the standards section of the home OC, because really the concern with transportation services is the vehicles and the traffic that they would generate. And so currently we prohibited transportation services, and it listed uses like limousines and tow trucks and taxis and things like that, which generally makes sense. You're going to have a lot more traffic. The vehicles are larger and they probably don't belong in a neighborhood. But there are other aspects of transportation services that are appropriate for a neighborhood, such as maybe an Uber driver or a Lyft driver. They're using their standard vehicle, things like that. So we're just modifying this section, taking transportation off the prohibition list and moving it really to an operating standard, saying, well, you can do transportation services, but you can't have these particular vehicles in your home at your residence as part of the business. And so the shift was to move the list that said limousines, taxis, and tow trucks to the standards. But then as a follow-up to that, I am proposing an amendment that's different than what's in your staff report, and actually to remove the word taxis. As you think about it, taxis, a standard vehicle. People have them at their home, no different than maybe a Lyft or an Uber car, something like that. And the limousines and tow trucks, really, they are the larger vehicles that are more impactful to our residential streets. So I am proposing to delete the taxi statement and leave the sentence just to read examples of prohibited vehicles to include limousines and tow trucks, etc., and take out the taxi. Other than that, there's no other significant changes to discuss, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on anything I discussed or that was in the report.
Allison, I have a question.
Yep.
If you move that, I don't see any mention of the number of vehicles allowed, so that,
For a business related purpose,
yeah, if you're going to open up transportation to homes, and like you said, it's probably Uber and Lyft, you know. But if you're running a business out of your home that's transportation related, say somebody has 10 vehicles they want to run, you know, and have people show up at their home and pick up their vehicles, is that something then that would then be permitted?
well, to have a home business, you have to be the occupant of the home, so you have to live there.
Okay.
You can have one employee come, so maybe you're ride sharing or whatever, come work at the house. You can have one employee, but you can have no more than one.
Okay, that answers that question. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions for staff from the commissioners?
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions, as I mentioned, this is an action that will go to the before the city council for a final decision. Expect that to be at their August meeting.
Okay. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have any comments on these topics for?
We have no comments, Chair. We have no comments, Chair.
Great.
Thank you, Casey.
I'm going to close the public hearing. Any other further comments from commissioners? No, not hearing anybody. No, I don't see any notes coming through. So, okay, with that, may I have a motion, and you can abbreviate each one. Well, actually, I want to defer to Ryan. Do we need to read each one of these again, Ryan?
Oh, you can summarize them. And since they're recommendations to the city council, they could be done in mass. So if somebody wants to say, I move approval of the 3 motions on the screen, I think that would suffice.
May I have a motion to approve all 3 motions on the screen?
I move that we adopt all 3 motions, motion 1, 2, and 3.
I have a second.
And recommend to the city council.
I'll second.
Thank you. Marcel Flowers, Commissioner Flowers, seconds. Please call the roll.
Item 6A, exemption from California Environmental Quality Act. Commissioner Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino? Commissioner Lagomasino?
Michael, we're having a mute issue with you, I believe.
Should be unmuted now.
There you
go.
Michael, did you give your?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
Item 6B, a recommendation of council to adopt the resolution of the general plan shown in Exhibit A. Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
Thank you. And final item, recommendation for council to adopt the ordinance of various sections of chapter 106 of the city municipal code shown in Exhibit B as amended. Duncan is absent. Commissioner Flowers?
Yes.
Commissioner Engel?
Yes.
Commissioner Lagomasino?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Duker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Yes.
Chair Schaefer?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passed unanimously.
We have the next item, please.
Regular calendar, and we have none.
Next item, please.
Manager items, we have none.
Just You know, we don't know exactly when we'll be back to normal. So thank you for your patience as we do this. We'll likely follow the city council's lead on this. And that has yet to be determined how that's going to work out. So we may still have a couple more Zoom meetings ahead of us. So thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Next item, please.
That's it, Chair. If you can adjourn the
Okay,
meeting.
with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 7:22 p.m. on 7/22/2020.
Thank you all for your patience, and we will see you next time. Have a good night,
Right.
all.
Bye, everyone.
Now I can go to